now by the Deputy Conservative Party Leader, Melissa Lantsman. Ms. Lantsman, good to see you. Thanks for coming in today. You've agreed to fast-track this motion, even though you criticized it today, saying it won't really help that much, and all of this spending is going to add to inflation.
Yeah, well, certainly. Well, you've got almost $12.5 billion of new inflationary debt. That's after a budget was just put on the table. This is unaccounted for spending. So there's no doubt that that's going to have an impact on the rising cost of everything, as more spending always does. But
so why vote for inflation then?
So the criticism here is that this is the exact same thing. It was that same finance minister when he was industry minister just 3 years ago. Made the same announcement. Actually, he summoned grocery store CEOs. He told everybody that he would increase competition and the grocery prices would stabilize. And that didn't happen. In fact, we have the highest grocery inflation in the G7. We have 2.2 million people using a food bank in a single month. So we're not going to stand in the way of the minimal relief that hungry people will get. But we're not enthusiastic about it. Again, we're not going to stand in the way.
But if the bigger consequence is, as you say, this is a deficit spending initiative, and it is the deficit, the Conservatives hold, that is driving food inflation, how can you vote for inflation when you've criticized this for years?
Here's the thing. If somebody gave you a $10 coupon when you walked into the grocery store, would you not take it? Yeah. Of course you would. But that doesn't really get to the crux of the problem, and it doesn't really do much for most people, who, by the way, won't get this, on a $300 grocery tab. Our suggestion is to do this and bring forward the solutions that we've talked about. Getting rid of the industrial carbon tax, the excessive food packaging taxes that end up about $1 billion, which is passed down to the consumer, the fuel standard, which is 17 cents a liter on gas. Those things would actually reduce and reduce spending.
But, there's a lot of economic analysis, and I'm looking at a report here from the TD Bank talking about why food inflation is higher here versus the United States. And there's a bunch of issues on specific things, like meat is being affected by a drought from like 4 or 5 years ago. But the U.S. grows most of its own fruit and vegetables. We import more than half of our fruits and vegetables from the U.S. So the weak Canadian dollar, buying in U.S., selling in Canadian, these are reasons why it's higher here rather than deficit spending.
It doesn't account for why our food inflation is the highest. There are lots of other countries in the G7 that import much of their food, and we're 2 times higher.
Japan's is higher than ours, and the UK is
we're the highest. Our inflation growth is the highest in the G7 right now. So. It doesn't really account for why we are half, or why ours is double the U.S. Like, we've got enough food to feed ourselves and feed the world. We've got some farmers, we've got smart people. I think we're squandering our potential and our resources, and we want to bring solutions to the table. We've done that. We're going to do that tomorrow again with a motion in the House, and we hope that the government will take some of this and start to look at the factors that will reduce food costs in this country.
Right. I mean, the analysis from TD Bank and others, though, is like the blame for the government in food inflation over the past year would be the 25% retaliatory tariffs on the U.S. Those affected things coming in. The currency is a challenge, transportation costs, the concentration of our grocery sector versus the U.S., and the lack of fruit and vegetable production here.
This is a minister who, again, summoned those CEOs. They said that they would increase competition. He said that food prices would stabilize by Thanksgiving 3 years ago. Here we are today. He's the finance minister. He's saying the exact same thing, making the exact same announcement. Actually, if you put the announcements sort of side by side with Prime Minister Trudeau and Prime Minister Carney, it almost looks like the same grocery store. No price tags behind them, and almost the same words on a failed policy the first time around. So it seems a big Groundhog Day, if you will, to do it again.
But I guess my point is there's a lot of economic analysis that suggests the deficit is not what's causing this, right? Because just the math, like, I'm not going to say an $80 billion deficit is small by any stretch of the imagination. It's 2.5% of GDP. But the comparator you're using on the grocery prices is the U.S. Their deficit is $1.7 trillion, which is 6% of GDP. So if it was straight line from deficit to food prices, America's would be much higher.
I never said it was a straight line. And certainly, I think it's one of the factors. And another $12.5 billion after just presenting a budget. So this is unaccounted for cash. We don't know if it's $12 billion more. We don't know where that $12 billion comes from. But it is things like the packaging tax. It is things like a fuel standard. You just talked about transportation costs. It is things like an industrial carbon tax.
Well, okay.
Those things are passed down.
There's a lot of carve-outs. The industrial carbon tax, I've talked about this with Mr. Scheer many times. There's many carve-outs in that and exemptions to protect different things. But on this, whether you agree with the policy direction or not, and I take your point, this is new spending outside of the budget.
Sure.
Now, the $12 billion is over 5 years, but it's still billions in
billions.
year one. You're willing to cooperate on
It's actually higher in year one because
there's a 50% top up in 1 year. But you're willing to work with them on this. We've just learned that Mr. Poilievre and the Prime Minister will have a meeting at some point this week, and I know the scheduling of that needs to be worked out. There is an agreement of some sort to move ahead on the bail reform legislation, which again you see as kind of a half loaf, but let's not get in the way of it.
We'll take what we can get.
Where else are you willing to cooperate with the government? Because on things like the clean fuel standard, industrial carbon pricing, plastics ban, I'm not sure they want to do those things.
I think we want to see the Prime Minister put his words into actual outcomes. I think we want to see him approve projects and not just spend more money on a project office that actually hasn't granted any of the approvals, whether that's resources to the West Coast, whether that's approving projects on critical minerals. We'd love to see a tax exemption on the capital gains tax. We'd love to see the things in our Sovereignty Act. And if he has more ideas on those things, we would be willing to work with him as well. We want to work to restore, again, that hope in the country, to make ourselves more resilient, more self-reliant, and instead of talking about sovereignty, do the sovereignty.
Right, but you're willing to work with the Liberals on the things the Conservatives ran on in the last election. What is it that they ran on that you're willing to work with them on?
They're putting forward the things that we ran on. So sure, we're willing to work with the things. We wish they went all the way. Crime is another one. We're willing to work with them to expedite bills through the House on additional trade relationships, like with Indonesia. There's lots we'll work with them there. But we're going to stand also as an opposition to the things that we think don't go far enough. 8 million people sent us to Ottawa in terms of numbers of votes, to oppose the government where it makes sense, to work with the government and propose solutions, and then also to expose the things that they're not telling us.
So on the bail reform, that is going to probably go through the Justice Committee and get back to the House this week, is my understanding.
Yeah, about time.
But what about...
We tried about 14 times before.
Well, but there were other issues with the hate legislation that they're bringing in, because of concerns in your party about criminalizing religious speech and scriptures, which the Liberals insist it will not do. But where does that particular piece of legislation go? Because this is something that certain vulnerable groups do want to see movement on. I mean, how do you compromise on that one?
Well, we've seen lots of groups come out against it. Criminalizing speech and criminalizing religious scripture isn't going to keep Canadians safe. In fact, restricting freedom isn't going to bring you more freedom. And the very people that I think are putting forward that legislation are going to be the arbiters of what hate is. We were willing to work with the government. In fact, before they made that deal with the Bloc to include this problematic provision, we were going through amendments. It was a bill that we could see going forward on criminalizing the hate marches in our streets, and they decided to make a deal on something entirely different. So we're going to oppose that and hope we get back to a bill that will actually protect communities rather than criminalize.
But there's no path forward on that one as
well,
we
they've
talk
decided
right now.
We've asked a million times over, and by a million I mean 14 times over, at committee to bring forward the bail legislation. This has been an issue that we've heard about in our communities for years and years and years, where repeat violent offenders are churned out on the street at the cost of victims being re-victimized. So yeah, we want to get that through. And while I don't think it goes necessarily far enough by killing Bill C-75 or C-5, it is a step in the right direction, and it will make sure that repeat violent offenders are behind bars where they belong.
Okay, so your leader will meet with the Prime Minister this week, something that can happen because of the 87.4% of the vote that he got on Friday night, right? The resounding endorsement and support from the party. You look at the broader ecosystem, though, right? The Conservative Party, the data would suggest from the vote and public opinion polling, clearly with Mr. Poilievre. The accessible vote for Conservatives, despite the 8.1 million he got in the election, there is a growing challenge there that his own personal negatives are not great, and the gap between him and Mr. Carney is pretty large. What does he need to do? What do you need to do as a party to get back to the point where the leader, who is going to have another chance at this, gets back to being competitive and viable with the Prime Minister?
Well, look, I think our job is to go there to Parliament, first of all, to be the effective opposition and a government in waiting, provide hope to the millions of Canadians that sent us there, the young families that want a roof over their head, put affordable food on the table, the seniors who have worked their entire lives and are lining up at food banks, the victims of crime who see repeat violent offenders again churned out on the streets. That's who we're going to speak to. We're going to speak to those very very issues that, by the way, have gotten worse and not better since the election. So that's what we'll continue to do, and we've got a great team to do it, including with Mr. Poilievre at the helm, who, again, got a resounding endorsement from our party, and we're excited to go forward.
But the shift to hope, as was outlined in the signs that people were holding up Friday night in Calgary, from Canada is broken, is a pretty dramatic shift from Mr. Poilievre. Is that a recognition that the negativity and the pugilism style was just too much? Because that's what's showing up in some of the data.
So I think hope was always, was always part of the message. All of those people that showed up at the rallies, who watched Mr. Poilievre in their cars when they had lost their homes or when they had lost their jobs, it was always a message of hope that he would do something to change that. And what we've seen from Mr. Carney, again, is like running up the word count, lots of speeches, and no outcomes for any of those people. So the hope was certainly always there, and it will continue to be there. And I'm not sure what you're suggesting, but I think what he told everybody is that he wasn't going to give up, and we're not going to give up on the millions of Canadians either.
I fully didn't expect him to give up, and I wasn't suggesting that. It's just that it was a notable shift to a more positive tone and a more positive frame than we always see, not always see, but have consistently seen from Mr. Poilievre in the past. And this is what people who work for him were suggesting we should pay attention to.
Yeah, look, I've seen iterations of Pierre, and the one thing that's been consistent is that he listens to people, and he takes that he takes that advice, both from people that work for him and people on the ground, the ones that show up, the ones that wait in 3-hour lineups to just have a word with him to say, things aren't going well for me. He listens to that, takes the advice, and then we create policy as a team around it to fix it.
One last thing. Your party has pointed to the separatist movements in Quebec and in Alberta as something that is maybe a Liberal problem, a Liberal creation, and certainly something for the Liberals to address. But national unity, all national leaders need to address that. I mean, obviously the Prime Minister can't outsource it, but there is a role for you, Mr. Poilievre, the Conservative Party. I mean, how do you, as a party and a caucus, plan to approach these challenges?
Well, as a party, I don't think you can alienate Alberta in terms of its resource sector. I don't think you can alienate Quebec in terms of its provincial autonomy. Actually, both of those things are right. And what we are saying is that these crises come up to a boiling level when there's a Liberal government in town. And that's just the reality of what's happening. And we understand all of that. We understand the feeling on the ground from those in Quebec and those in Alberta. But the answer to separation is to create a more resilient, more reliant, more sovereign country that benefits everybody.
Right, but the Bloc and the Reform Party were founded and created when Brian Mulroney was Prime Minister. Like it is part of a continuum in the country, regional alienation.
Well, we're seeing
right?
we're seeing that alienation take hold in protests in the streets, with actual movements coming forward, and it happens when there's a Liberal Prime Minister. That's just the fact.
Okay. Conservative Deputy Leader Melissa Lansman, appreciate the time. Thanks for coming in. All right, still to come later this